The millionaire had long since tired of the world of boardrooms, fancy cars, and the constant noise of wealth. For years, he had been building his empire from the ground up, seeing it grow into something unimaginable when he first started out. But somewhere along the way, he lost touch with the people who made his success possible, the ones who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, making his vision a reality. Over the years, he had heard whispers of problems within his company, stories about employee dissatisfaction, low morale, and even complaints from customers about how they were treated. Yet his busy schedule never allowed him the luxury to truly step into his stores and see firsthand what was going on. That is, until one evening, when he found himself sitting alone in his penthouse staring out at the city lights. He realized that despite his success, there was something missing. A gut feeling told him that the business he had built, the one that took up so much of his life, needed more than just his distant oversight. It needed him to step into its very heart, to feel what his employees felt, to see what they saw. The thought of not knowing the true state of his business gnawed at him. It was then that he decided to visit one of his most important stores, a small but busy branch in the heart of the city. It had been years since he had stepped foot inside, and he was curious to see how things had changed. But he did not want to reveal his identity just yet. He didn't want any special treatment. No, he would visit as a regular customer, disguised and anonymous. He wanted to see things without any filters, without the pretense that came with being the owner. He thought about how easy it would be for the employees to act differently if they knew the man who signed their paychecks was in the store. No, he would remain unknown, observing from the shadows, a silent witness to what truly happened within the walls of his empire. So, on that fateful day, he dressed in simple clothes, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. He wore a baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses, ensuring that no one would recognize him. It was strange stepping into his own store like this. The familiar scent of fresh baked goods and cleaning products filled the air as he walked through the entrance. The bright fluorescent lights hummed above him, and the shelves were stocked neatly with products just as they should be. But beneath the surface of this polished exterior, he could feel an undercurrent of tension. It wasn't immediately obvious, but there was something about the way the employees interacted with each other that caught his attention. As he made his way through the aisles, he saw the usual mix of shoppers, busy mothers with children, elderly couples browsing the aisles, and young professionals picking up items for their evening meals. But it was when he reached the checkout line that he noticed something different. There, standing behind the counter, was a young black woman working as the cashier. Her name tag read, Sarah. She was tall, with curly hair pulled back into a neat bun, and a soft smile that seemed to be a permanent feature on her face. Yet, as he watched her interact with customers, he noticed something in her eyes, an unease that didn't belong in a place like this. She greeted each customer with a warmth that felt genuine, but there was something about her movements that seemed rehearsed, like she was trying too hard to stay composed. She was efficient, scanning items quickly and making polite conversation, but he could see that there was a visible strain in her posture. There was a subtle tension in her shoulders, an edge to her smile that told him that she wasn't just performing a job, she was holding herself together. Curiosity piqued. He decided to stay for a while longer. He walked past the registers, pretending to browse the shelves, but his attention was firmly on Sarah. He began to pick up on the small things, the way she would glance nervously over her shoulder at the manager, the slight quiver in her hands when she counted the change. She was clearly trying to keep it together, but there was something in her body language that spoke volumes. It wasn't just the customers that were making her uneasy. It was something more. As he continued to observe, the store manager walked past him, and he noticed the way Sarah stiffened at his presence. The manager was a tall, middle-aged man with a commanding presence. He was well-dressed in a button-up shirt and slacks, his eyes constantly scanning the store with a sense of authority. There was a tension in his stride, a sense of urgency as he moved through the aisles. The millionaire didn't think much of it at first, but as the man walked past the cashier's register, he overheard a few snide comments directed toward Sarah. "Make sure you don't mess up this time," the manager muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the millionaire to hear. It was a casual remark, but the sting in Sarah's eyes told him it was far from the first time. She tried to shake it off with a forced smile, but he could see the effect it had on her. The manager's voice cut through the air again, this time in a louder, more commanding tone. "Come on, Sarah, hurry it up. "There are customers waiting," he barked, his words sharp like a whip. The millionaire's stomach twisted. He had seen and heard enough. The interaction had been brief, but it was enough to confirm what he had suspected. The manager's treatment of Sarah was not an isolated incident. He could see it in her eyes, the way she held herself back, the way her confidence seemed to evaporate the moment the manager entered the room. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and it was affecting Sarah deeply. The millionaire felt a wave of anger rush through him. How could this be happening in one of his stores? How had he let this continue for so long without noticing? He had built this company with the idea that it would be a place where everyone was respected, where hard work was rewarded, and employees were valued. Yet here, right under his nose, was an employee being humiliated day in and day out. He stepped away from the aisle, his thoughts racing. He knew he needed to do something, but he also knew he couldn't reveal himself yet. If Sarah knew who he was, she might act differently or worse. She might think he was just another person with a position of power who would do nothing to change things. No, he had to be careful. He had to understand the full extent of what was happening before making any decisions. For the rest of the day, he wandered the store pretending to shop but constantly watching Sarah. As the day wore on, he saw more interactions between her and the manager, and they were all the same, short, condescending, and filled with tension. It was clear to him that Sarah was walking on eggshells every time the manager was around, afraid of making the smallest mistake. And with every passing moment, his anger grew. But there was something else he noticed too. Despite the manager's mistreatment, Sarah never once raised her voice or complained. She didn't argue or snap back. She just took it. She did her job with quiet dignity, her resilience shining through in every move. The millionaire knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. Something had to change, and he would make sure it did. But for now, he had to stay in the shadows, watching, learning, and preparing to take action. The store may have seemed like any other business on the surface, but beneath that, there was a deeper story unfolding, one that needed to be heard. As the millionaire stood near the back of the store, pretending to inspect some items on the shelves, his mind kept drifting back to Sarah. The young cashier was on his mind, and the more he thought about the way she had been treated, the more he felt compelled to intervene. He had seen the interaction between her and the manager, but something told him that this wasn't an isolated incident. The way Sarah moved, the way she hesitated before every task, it all pointed to something much deeper than a few offhand comments. It was clear that the manager had been slowly wearing her down over time, bit by bit, in a way that was both cruel and subtle. As the hours passed, the store began to quiet down. The evening rush had subsided, and there were only a few customers left in the aisles. The millionaire knew that this was his chance to observe without being too obvious. He kept a close eye on Sarah, watching her every move as she continued to scan items and help customers. Despite the calm atmosphere of the store, he could sense the weight she was carrying. There was a tiredness in her eyes that suggested she had been through a long day and a long struggle. He watched as she helped an elderly woman at the checkout. The woman was slow, taking her time to find the right change, and Sarah, despite her obvious exhaustion, was patient and kind. But even in this quiet, seemingly innocent moment, the millionaire noticed the manager lingering nearby, watching the transaction with a look of disdain. The moment the elderly woman left, the manager walked up to the counter, and his voice cut through the air. "You took too long with that customer," he said, his tone sharp and dismissive. "You should have been quicker. The line is getting backed up." Sarah didn't respond. She simply nodded, keeping her head down. The millionaire saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her hand shook slightly as she continued to ring up the next customer. The manager's words hung in the air, as though Sarah were too afraid to shake them off. The millionaire could see that this wasn't just about efficiency. The manager wasn't simply concerned with the speed at which the store was running. He was making a point. He was breaking Sarah down piece by piece, undermining her confidence and using his position of power to manipulate her into submission. It was a slow, insidious form of control, one that had clearly been happening for some time. The more the millionaire watched, the more disgusted he became. He had thought of his business as a place of opportunity and fairness. How had it come to this? The manager, seeing that Sarah was still silent, gave a satisfied nod and walked away, leaving her to continue her work in silence. The millionaire could see that this was no isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a toxic environment that had been allowed to flourish under his nose. He was filled with a sense of urgency now, knowing that he could no longer stand by and do nothing. He couldn't just fire the manager on a whim. He needed to understand the full scope of the problem. This wasn't just about one employee. It was about the culture that had been allowed to grow in the store. How many others had been affected by this toxic environment? How many other employees were too afraid to speak up? The millionaire stood there for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could right this wrong. He had built his empire on the principles of respect, fairness, and hard work, but it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The way the manager treated Sarah was not just a flaw in one individual, it was a symptom of a larger issue. The store, once a symbol of success, had become a breeding ground for fear and intimidation. And Sarah, the young cashier who had only wanted to do her job and make a living, had become the unfortunate target of that fear. As the evening came to an end, the store began to empty out. Sarah worked in silence, her movements mechanical as she rang up the last few customers. The millionaire watched from a distance, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. He had seen enough. He knew that things had to change. He couldn't allow the store to continue in this way, allowing the manager to terrorize his employees. He had to act, and he had to act quickly. But first, he needed to gather more information. He couldn't simply confront the manager without understanding the full extent of the problem. He needed to know if Sarah was the only one suffering, or if there were others who had been affected by the manager's cruelty. He needed to know the truth, every detail, before making any decisions. The next day, he returned to the store, again in disguise, but this time with a new sense of purpose. He had already seen the way the manager treated Sarah, but now he wanted to hear from the other employees. He made his way through the aisles, striking up casual conversations with the staff. At first, they were hesitant, unsure of why this stranger was asking about their experiences. But as he continued to engage them one by one, they began to open up. He learned that Sarah wasn't the only one who had been mistreated. Several other employees, both new and old, had been subjected to the same kind of treatment. Some had been yelled at for making mistakes, while others had been humiliated in front of customers. The manager had a reputation for being harsh, but no one had ever dared to speak out against him. Fear had kept them silent. The more the millionaire heard, the angrier he became. It was clear that the toxic environment had been allowed to persist because no one felt they could stand up for themselves. The manager had created a culture of fear, and it had infected every corner of the store. As the millionaire gathered more information, he couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face from his mind. She was a young woman with so much potential, yet she had been trapped in a cycle of fear and humiliation. Her dreams, her aspirations were being slowly crushed under the weight of the manager's cruelty. And for what? To maintain control over a few employees? To feel powerful in a place where he was supposed to be fostering growth and success? It was a question the millionaire couldn't answer, but one that made him even more determined to act. That night, as he sat in his office, he knew that everything had to change. He couldn't allow the store to continue operating under such toxic conditions. The manager had to be confronted, and the employees needed to know that their voices would be heard. Sarah's story, and the stories of all the other employees who had suffered in silence, had to be told, and the millionaire would make sure they were heard. He would take action, not just for Sarah, but for every worker who had ever felt like they didn't matter. The next day, he returned to the store, this time with a plan. He would confront the manager, expose his behavior, and show the employees that things were about to change. It was time for the store to stop being a place of fear and become a place of respect and opportunity once again. The millionaire woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the previous day, the conversations he had overheard, and the image of Sarah's worn-out expression all weighed heavily on him. He had seen the dysfunction within his store and, more importantly, the emotional toll it had taken on the employees. But now he knew what had to be done. There was no going back. He couldn't turn a blind eye any longer. His mind raced as he thought about his next steps. He had witnessed enough to understand the issue. The manager's behavior had not only created a hostile environment for the workers, but had also poisoned the very culture of the store. It wasn't just Sarah that had been mistreated. Many employees had suffered in silence, their voices unheard, their dignity compromised, all because of one person in power who had been allowed to act without consequence. He had to confront the manager, but not in the way one might expect. He didn't want to humiliate him in front of the employees. No, he needed to get to the root of the issue, to understand the manager's motivations and to ensure that whatever he did next was rooted in fairness and justice. But that required him to dig deeper, to look beyond the surface to understand why the manager had behaved this way for so long. So he arrived at the store early, well before the employees began their shifts. It was the best time to observe, to gather his thoughts and to prepare for what was coming. The store was quiet, empty, and the bright lights of the fluorescent bulbs flickered gently overhead. The shelves were neatly stocked, and the hum of the refrigerators filled the otherwise empty space. It was almost as if the store were holding its breath, waiting for something to change. He knew the manager would be arriving soon. The man who had been so quick to belittle and degrade his employees was probably on his way already, unaware of what was about to unfold. The millionaire moved to a quiet corner of the store, where he could see the entire space but remain unnoticed. He didn't want anyone to know he was there yet. He had to be careful just as he had been the day before. Soon enough, the manager arrived, his footsteps heavy as he walked through the front door. He was as confident as always, perhaps a bit too confident. He didn't notice the millionaire in the corner, or if he did, he dismissed him as just another customer. The millionaire watched as the manager took a moment to survey the store, his eyes scanning the shelves and the floor, making sure everything was in order. The sense of authority that the manager carried with him was palpable. But there was something different today. The millionaire could feel it in his gut. There was a storm brewing, and it was only a matter of time before it would break. The manager walked into the back office where he would prepare for the day ahead. This was the moment the millionaire had been waiting for. He needed to act fast before the manager could begin his usual routine of intimidation and control. The millionaire stood up from his hiding place, his heart pounding in his chest. He walked calmly toward the office, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the store. He reached the office door and knocked lightly. There was a brief pause, and then the manager's voice called out, "Come in." The door opened slowly, and the millionaire stepped inside. The manager, who had been sitting at his desk looking over the day's paperwork, looked up in surprise. His expression changed instantly from casual indifference to shock when he saw the man standing before him. "You," the manager trailed off, not knowing what to say. He clearly didn't recognize the millionaire. The millionaire, still disguised, gave a small nod. "I know who you are," the millionaire said calmly. "I've been watching you. I've seen how you treat your employees." The words were quiet but firm, and they hung in the air between them. The manager's face went pale. He stood up quickly as if about to protest, but the millionaire raised a hand to stop him. "You don't need to speak," the millionaire continued, his voice still calm. "I've seen enough. I've spoken to your employees, and I've seen firsthand how you have treated them. The way you berate them, humiliate them, and belittle them in front of customers. It's not just Sarah, it's all of them. You've created an environment of fear and intimidation, and I can't allow it to continue." The manager's eyes darted around the room, panic beginning to set in. He opened his mouth to speak, but the millionaire cut him off again. "I didn't come here to fire you right away," he said. "I want to understand why you've done this. Why you've treated people this way. Was it power, control? Did you think you could get away with it? Do you even care about the people who work for you?" The manager's face twisted into a mixture of shame and defensiveness, but the millionaire's gaze never wavered. The millionaire stepped closer to the desk, his presence filling the small room. "You were hired to lead, not to crush the spirits of those beneath you. You were entrusted with their well-being, but instead you've abused that trust. What happened to you? How did you become the person you are today?" The manager seemed to shrink under the weight of the millionaire's words. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the manager spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought they needed discipline. I thought they needed structure." He paused, his hands shaking as he looked down at the desk. "But I didn't realize how far I'd gone. I just wanted to make sure things ran smoothly. I didn't know how to get them to listen to me." The millionaire's heart softened, but he didn't let the manager off the hook. "Discipline isn't about fear," he said. "It's about respect. You lost sight of that, and in doing so, you destroyed the morale of the people you were supposed to lead." The manager's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he seemed truly defeated. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't realize how much I had hurt them. I thought I was doing what was best." "You've failed them," the millionaire said, his voice low but not unkind. "But there's still time to fix this. Not for you, for them. You have one chance to redeem yourself, but you must be willing to make a change." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "I won't fire you today, but if you don't prove to me that you can change, you'll have no place in this company." "Understand?" The manager nodded silently, tears welling in his eyes as the gravity of his actions hit him. For the first time, he realized how far he had gone, how much damage he had done to his team, and for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be a leader. The millionaire turned and walked toward the door, his final words echoing in the room. "This is your last chance. Make it count." As he stepped out into the store, the millionaire felt a strange sense of calm. The decision had been made. The manager had been confronted, but the real work was just beginning. He had seen the cracks in the foundation of his business, and now he would do everything in his power to rebuild it. This store, this company, it was more than just numbers and profits. It was a reflection of who he was as a person, and from this day forward, he vowed to make it a place where respect, kindness, and fairness were the core values, not just a facade. The day after his confrontation with the manager, the millionaire woke up with a heavy heart. The events of the previous day were still fresh in his mind. He could still see the manager's face, the way his pride had crumbled in front of him. The apology, while sincere, didn't erase the damage that had been done, nor did it heal the wounds that Sarah and the other employees had endured. It wasn't just about the manager anymore. It was about changing the entire environment of the store, creating a space where everyone felt valued and respected, regardless of their position or background. He arrived at the store early, just as the sun began to rise over the city. The streets were still empty, the air crisp and cool. He parked his car in the lot behind the building and sat for a moment, collecting his thoughts. This was a turning point. The way he handled this moment would determine the future of the company and the lives of the people who worked for him. The store was quiet when he entered, the sounds of the morning stillness broken only by the hum of the refrigerators and the rustle of paper bags being prepared for the day's sales. The millionaire took a deep breath and began walking through the aisles, his eyes scanning the familiar layout of the store. He had seen it 1,000 times before, but today it felt different. He was seeing it through new eyes, eyes that understood the deeper struggles of the people who worked there. As he made his way toward the back office, he saw Sarah behind the cashier's counter. She was alone, scanning items for an early customer. Her expression was a mix of concentration and exhaustion, as if she were trying to hold it all together. He watched her for a moment, admiring the way she handled herself despite the weight she carried. There was strength in her, something he had seen glimpses of in their brief exchanges, but it was clear to him now that she needed more than just an apology. She needed support. She needed a space where she could thrive, where she didn't have to hide her pain behind a forced smile. The millionaire continued walking, passing by the rows of shelves filled with products. He had a new sense of urgency now. He needed to do something more than just make the store run efficiently. It wasn't enough to fix the problems at the surface. He needed to dig deeper to create real, lasting change. The manager's actions were a reflection of the toxic culture that had taken root within the company, and he knew that eradicating it would take time, effort, and a commitment from everyone. He reached the back office, where the manager sat at his desk looking through the store's performance reports. The manager looked up as the millionaire entered, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was thick, and the millionaire could sense that the manager was waiting for him to say something. He had already made it clear that the manager's behavior needed to change, but now it was time to discuss the path forward. "You're here early," the manager said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he were trying to mask his nervousness. "What can I do for you?" The millionaire took a seat across from him, leaning forward slightly. "We need to talk about the changes that need to happen here," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "This store isn't just a business. It's a community. And right now, that community is fractured. We can't just fix things by making small adjustments. We need to address the root of the problem, the way people are treated, the way we treat each other." The manager shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward the door as if considering an escape. But he knew there was nowhere to run. The millionaire wasn't just talking about him anymore, he was talking about the store as a whole. The manager's role in creating this toxic environment wasn't just a personal failing, it was part of a larger issue that had affected everyone. "I understand," the manager said quietly, though his voice lacked conviction, "but I don't know how to fix it. It's hard to change the way things are. The employees, they don't listen to me. They don't respect me." The millionaire leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Respect is earned, not demanded. If you treat people with dignity, if you lead by example, you'll earn their respect. You don't do that by humiliating them or making them feel small. You do that by empowering them, by showing them that their work matters. You've been so focused on control you've forgotten the most important part of leadership: connection." The manager sat back in his chair, staring at the desk in front of him. He looked defeated, but the millionaire could see that something was shifting in him. The realization was starting to dawn on him that he had lost his way, that his actions had consequences beyond the immediate results of the store's operations. "We need to change the culture here," the millionaire continued. "It starts with you, but it doesn't end with you. Every person in this store needs to feel like they matter, like their contributions are valued. You need to build a team, not an army of workers who fear you." For the first time, the manager looked up, his eyes meeting the millionaire's. There was a flicker of understanding in his gaze, but it was clear he wasn't entirely sure how to begin. "I'm going to give you a chance to change," the millionaire said, "but that means you need to lead differently. You need to show the employees that they have a voice, that their concerns are heard. If you can do that, I'll support you. But if you can't, I'll have no choice but to let you go." The words were heavy, and the manager knew this was his last chance. He nodded silently, his expression one of quiet determination. He was beginning to understand the weight of the responsibility that had been placed on his shoulders. It wasn't just about managing the store. It was about leading with empathy and respect, and that would require a level of humility he had never shown before. As the millionaire stood up to leave, he paused for a moment, looking at the manager one last time. "I'm going to check in regularly," he said, "but it's up to you to prove that you can change." The millionaire turned and walked toward the door, but before he left, he glanced back at the manager. "Remember, leadership isn't about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge." The manager didn't respond. He just sat there deep in thought as the door closed behind the millionaire. The weight of the conversation hung in the air long after the millionaire was gone. The millionaire's work was far from over. This conversation was just the beginning of a long journey. The store needed a complete overhaul, not just in management, but in the way the employees were treated, respected, and valued. He had seen enough to know that the store could be a place where people thrived, where their hard work was acknowledged, and where they felt like part of a team rather than a cog in a machine. It was going to take time, but the millionaire was determined to make it happen. He wouldn't allow this store to remain a place where fear ruled. No, it would be a place of growth, opportunity, and respect. It would be a reflection of his values, a place where people could work hard, be treated fairly, and most importantly, feel seen and heard. As he left the store that day, he knew there was much to be done. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. The change was coming, and it would start with him. The following days felt like a whirlwind to the millionaire. He had given the manager a second chance, and now he was left with the daunting task of ensuring that the promised changes would take place. The conversation between them had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning of what would be a long and difficult process. The millionaire couldn't afford to rest on his laurels. He had to stay vigilant, observing and guiding to ensure that the promises of respect and fairness were actually put into practice. He had seen the damage the manager's behavior had caused, but now he had to rebuild trust, not only with the manager but with the employees as well. The millionaire visited the store every day, watching from the shadows at first. He would arrive before the staff came in and leave after they had gone. He needed to see how the manager was interacting with the employees, how the atmosphere was changing, and whether the employees felt the shift he had hoped for. At first, the changes were subtle. The manager was trying, but it wasn't easy. Old habits died hard. He was still occasionally terse with the staff, still quick to criticize and slow to praise. But there were moments, fleeting moments, when he would engage with them in a more positive way. He would offer a kind word, a gesture of appreciation that hadn't been there before. The millionaire watched it all, noting the small victories. He had told the manager that respect was earned, but it had to be consistently given. There could be no half measures, no moments of backsliding. For real change to happen, it had to be a continuous effort. The millionaire knew that despite the manager's efforts, the employees wouldn't easily forget the years of mistreatment. They would need time to trust him again. They needed to feel that the changes weren't just surface-level adjustments, but a genuine shift in the way things were done. One afternoon, as he stood by the aisles watching a conversation unfold between the manager and one of the newer employees, the millionaire saw the first real glimmer of hope. The manager was speaking to the employee, not with the usual authoritative tone, but with a sense of collaboration. He was offering advice, but not in a way that made the employee feel inferior. The employee listened, nodding along, and there was a sense of mutual respect that had been sorely lacking before. The millionaire couldn't help but smile to himself. It was a small moment, but it was a step in the right direction. Later that day, Sarah was at the front of the store scanning items as customers came and went. The millionaire could see the weariness in her movements, but there was something else too, something new. As she checked out a customer, she didn't seem as on edge as she had before. There was a calmness to her demeanor, a sense of peace that hadn't been there in the past. The manager had spoken to her earlier, and while it wasn't perfect, it was an improvement. She no longer seemed afraid to interact with him. She no longer seemed afraid to speak up when she needed to. She was beginning to find her voice again. The millionaire knew he had to approach her, to make sure she felt supported. He walked up to the counter, pretending to browse through the items on display. When she noticed him, she gave him a quick, wary glance, but he smiled gently, offering her a warm look. He wasn't the boss in that moment. He was just another person, just another customer. He wanted her to feel comfortable, to see that there was no reason to be afraid. "How's it going, Sarah?" he asked, his tone light and casual. She hesitated before responding, her eyes flicking toward the manager who was standing at the far end of the store, overseeing the employees. "It's going well," she said softly. "Better than before." The millionaire nodded, acknowledging the unspoken weight behind her words. "I'm glad to hear that. If there's ever anything you need, anything at all, don't hesitate to let me know." She looked at him for a moment, uncertainty still clouding her eyes. But then she nodded, a small but genuine smile appearing on her face. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The fact that she had said something positive about the environment meant more to him than anything else. It showed that, despite everything, there was still hope. As he moved through the store, observing the interactions between the staff, he began to feel a deep sense of satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped for. Change was happening. It wasn't going to be instantaneous, but it was real. People were starting to feel safe again. They were beginning to trust that things could be different, and that was the first step toward healing. The millionaire made it a point to talk to the other employees as well, asking them how they felt about the changes. Some were hesitant at first, unsure whether the manager's shift in behavior would last. They had seen him act one way before, and they weren't sure if this new approach was just a temporary phase. But the millionaire reassured them that this was just the beginning. The real change would come from the top down, and he was committed to ensuring that the store became a place where they felt valued and respected. A week passed, and the store's atmosphere had shifted. The energy was lighter. The tension that had once permeated every corner of the store was slowly dissipating. The manager was trying, and the employees were responding. The millionaire couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had known that it would take time, but this was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. That night, as he sat in his office, reflecting on the changes he had witnessed, he realized that the journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, and he needed to stay involved. It wasn't just about fixing the manager's behavior. It was about fostering a culture where everyone felt they could succeed, where everyone was given the opportunity to rise above the challenges they faced. The millionaire couldn't help but think about Sarah. She had been the catalyst for this change. Her quiet strength had pushed him to take action, and now, as he watched her grow more confident each day, he knew that he had made the right choice. She was more than just a cashier. She was a symbol of what could happen when people were treated with dignity and respect. She was proof that even in the darkest of circumstances, people could find their strength again. The road ahead would still be challenging. The store had a long way to go before it became the workplace he had always envisioned. But he had already taken the first step. He had seen the potential for change, and now he was committed to making it happen. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. Ready to lead with empathy, ready to guide his employees toward a brighter future. And as he looked out the window of his office, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, he knew that the future of the store, and the people in it, was in his hands. The following weeks were a test of patience for the millionaire. The changes he had started to implement in the store were beginning to take root, but like any process of transformation, it was slow and sometimes difficult. It wasn't just about changing the way the manager behaved. It was about changing the very culture of the store, something that had been ingrained in the employees for years. The million-dollar question was, would they truly believe in the change, or would it all fall apart at the first sign of adversity? He could feel the tension in the air as he walked through the store each morning. It wasn't an overt hostility, but there was an undercurrent of skepticism among the staff. They were waiting to see if the promises made by the millionaire and the manager were real, or if they were just another set of hollow words. People didn't forget easily, especially when they had been hurt. The store was still filled with employees who had been victimized by the old culture. They didn't trust the new atmosphere, not yet. They had to see that the change was lasting. The millionaire knew that trust wasn't something that could be rushed. It had to be earned over time, through consistent actions that showed the employees he was truly invested in their well-being. And so, he made it his mission to visit the store every day, sometimes twice a day, without fail. He would walk the aisles, speak with the employees, and listen to their concerns. The feedback was invaluable. At first, the conversations were awkward, hesitant, but gradually the walls began to come down. Employees started to open up, sharing their frustrations and their hopes for the future. There was something raw and honest in these exchanges, and the millionaire knew that he had made the right decision to put himself in the middle of it all. One day, as he was making his rounds, he stopped by Sarah's checkout counter. She was busy helping a customer, but when she saw him approach, she gave him a hesitant smile. It was a smile that held both gratitude and uncertainty. She was still figuring out the new dynamic of the store, still adjusting to the changes. But the millionaire could see that she was slowly starting to feel more at ease. There was less fear in her eyes, less anxiety in the way she carried herself. She was slowly becoming more comfortable in her role, more confident in her own abilities. "How's everything going, Sarah?" the millionaire asked, leaning on the counter casually. She looked at him for a moment before answering, her voice soft but steady. "It's better, sir. Things are better. The manager, he's trying." The millionaire nodded, pleased to hear that the changes were starting to take effect, even if they were still small. "Good," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "I know it's not easy. It'll take time, but I'm glad to hear things are improving." Sarah glanced around the store briefly, her eyes lingering on the other employees. "There's still some hesitation. People are still waiting to see if it's real, you know. If it will last." The millionaire sighed softly. He knew exactly what she meant. Trust had been broken in the past, and it couldn't be repaired overnight. "It's going to take time," he said. "But we'll get there. We have to believe that we can create something better. And that starts with people like you, Sarah. You're the ones who will help make that change happen. You matter. Never forget that." Her expression softened, and for the first time, she didn't look like she was just enduring her job. She looked like she was starting to find her place in it. "Thank you," she said quietly. I'm trying to believe that." As the weeks passed, the millionaire noticed a gradual shift in the overall atmosphere of the store. The manager was still learning, still making mistakes, but he was showing real progress. He had stopped barking orders at the employees and started taking a more hands-on approach. He began listening to their concerns, offering feedback that was constructive rather than critical. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One afternoon, the manager approached the millionaire while he was talking to some of the employees. He had a look of quiet pride on his face as he walked over, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't seem weighed down by the responsibilities of his role. "I think we're getting somewhere," he said, his voice tentative but hopeful. "The staff is starting to come around. They're trusting me more. I think they see that I'm trying." The millionaire smiled, glad to hear the manager's positive outlook. "It's not about being perfect," he said. "It's about showing them that you're committed to change, that you're here to build a team, not just to manage them." The manager nodded, his gaze turning to the employees who were working nearby. "I can see that now. I've made mistakes, and I know it's going to take time for them to fully trust me. But I'm ready to do the work." The millionaire placed a hand on the manager's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. Just keep it up. You've got this." As the days turned into weeks, the changes that had been set into motion began to take root. The store was no longer a place where employees worked in fear of their manager. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and the millionaire knew that this was only the beginning. There would be setbacks, moments of frustration, and days when it felt like they were taking one step forward and two steps back. But that was the reality of change. It was messy. It was uncomfortable. But it was necessary. One evening, as the store was winding down for the night, Sarah approached the millionaire again. This time there was a new sense of confidence in her posture. She didn't seem as hesitant or uncertain as she had before. She walked up to him with a determined look in her eyes. "I just wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me the chance to be heard, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." The millionaire smiled warmly at her. "You're the one who's doing the hard work, Sarah. You're the one who's making the difference. I'm just here to make sure you have the support you need." She nodded, her eyes shining with a quiet gratitude. "It means a lot to me. I've never felt like I mattered in a job before. But now I do." He could see the shift in her. It was subtle, but it was there. She was starting to believe in herself. And that was the greatest change of all. The millionaire left the store that night, his heart light. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But he had seen the difference he could make, and that made all the struggles worth it. The store was no longer just a business. It was a community, a place where people could come together, support each other, and grow. And for the first time in a long time, the millionaire felt like he was truly part of something bigger than himself. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but he was ready. He was committed to making sure that every person who worked for him knew their worth, knew that they mattered. Because in the end, that was the true measure of success. Not profits, not numbers, but people who were treated with dignity and respect, who were given the opportunity to rise, and who were empowered to achieve greatness. And as he looked back at the store, now a place of hope and change, he knew that the future was bright. They had come so far, and there was so much more to be done. But with each day they were building something better, together. The millionaire woke up to a new sense of purpose, but the weight of what lay ahead was heavier than ever. The changes in the store had taken root, but they had also brought new challenges. The initial excitement, the optimism that had filled the air just a few weeks ago, had begun to settle into a more complex reality. The manager had made strides, yes, but old habits weren't easy to break, and the employees were still hesitant, still unsure if this transformation was truly permanent. They had seen the toxicity of the past, and it had left scars that couldn't be erased overnight. Trust was something that had to be earned, not just promised, and the millionaire knew that he would have to remain vigilant, remain present, to ensure that the foundation they were building wouldn't crumble under the weight of doubt. It was a quiet morning when he arrived at the store again. Just as the first rays of light began to filter through the windows, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead greeted him, along with the familiar smell of fresh products and the muted chatter of employees preparing for another busy day. But today, something felt different. There was a shift in the air, something intangible yet noticeable. As he walked through the aisles, he could sense the quiet but steady energy of the store. The employees moved with purpose, working together, engaging with customers, and, most importantly, with each other. There was a sense of camaraderie that had been absent just a few weeks ago, a quiet but undeniable sign that the changes were becoming ingrained. He made his way to the front counter, where Sarah was busy checking out customers. She had always been the one he had focused on the most, the one whose journey of growth and empowerment had mirrored his own vision for the store. And now, as he watched her interact with a customer, he could see the difference. Her movements were confident, purposeful, and the fear that once clouded her eyes had been replaced with a quiet strength. She greeted each customer with a smile, her voice calm and assured as she scanned their items. She had come so far, and it was clear to him now that the store wasn't just a place where people came to work. It was a place where they came to find themselves, to rediscover their potential, and to rise above the limitations that had once held them back. As he stood there, watching Sarah, the manager walked past him. The millionaire nodded in his direction, and the manager returned the gesture, his face serious but more composed than before. The millionaire could see that the changes in him were real too. He had started to connect with the employees on a deeper level, not just as their boss, but as someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was what mattered. "Good morning," the manager greeted him, his voice steady and confident. "Good morning," the millionaire replied, glancing toward the back office. "How are things going today?" The manager paused, looking around the store before meeting the millionaire's gaze. "Better," he said quietly. "There's still a lot of work to do, but I think we're getting there." The millionaire nodded, watching as the manager moved off to speak with another employee. There was a certain weight to his steps now, a kind of responsibility that hadn't been there before. The manager had learned to embrace the challenges that came with leadership, to understand that it wasn't about control or power, but about guiding and nurturing those under his care. It hadn't been an easy lesson for him to learn, but it had been an important one. The millionaire continued to walk through the store, observing the subtle but significant shifts that had taken place. Employees were working together more cohesively, helping each other out without being asked. There was a sense of mutual respect that had been lacking before, a kind of unspoken understanding that they were all in this together, that their collective success was the result of their shared efforts. The store had become a place where people didn't just work to survive, they worked to thrive. And for the first time in a long time, the millionaire felt that the store was no longer just a business. It was a community. As the day wore on, the store began to fill with customers. The familiar buzz of activity took over, and the employees moved quickly, assisting customers, restocking shelves, and keeping the store running smoothly. But there was a new energy to the place, one that came from the employees themselves. They were no longer just going through the motions. They were engaged, invested, and proud of the work they were doing. The millionaire could see it in the way they interacted with customers, in the way they took ownership of their tasks, and in the way they supported one another. It was the kind of environment he had always dreamed of creating, but one that he had never thought possible until now. As the day came to an end and the store began to empty, the millionaire sat down in the back office, his mind racing with thoughts. He had come a long way since that first day when he had stepped into the store undercover, hoping to understand the truth of what was happening behind closed doors. At that time, he had felt a sense of helplessness, as if the problems were too large to solve, too deeply rooted to be fixed. But now, as he looked at the store around him, he realized that change wasn't just possible, it was happening. It wasn't easy. It hadn't been quick, but it was real. And as he reflected on the journey, he realized that the key to success wasn't just about having the right strategies or the right plans. It was about the people. It was about creating an environment where they felt heard, where they felt valued, and where they could succeed. It was about leadership that didn't come from a place of fear or control, but from a place of trust, respect, and mutual support. As the employees began to leave for the day, the millionaire stood up from his desk and walked out into the store once more. The lights had been dimmed and the quiet of the evening had settled in, but the energy of the place still lingered in the air. He walked through the aisles one last time, taking in the progress that had been made and feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. There was still work to be done, of course. There would always be challenges ahead, but he knew that they were on the right path now. They were building something that mattered, something that would stand the test of time. And for the first time, he felt that he wasn't just the owner of a store. He was a part of something much bigger, something that was bigger than himself. A community, a family, a place where people could truly thrive. As he stepped out of the store and into the cool evening air, he knew that the work wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time in a long time, he was excited for the future. He was ready to face whatever came next. because he had seen firsthand what was possible when people came together, when they believed in each other, and when they worked toward a common goal. And as he looked up at the stars above, he couldn't help but feel that anything was possible.